Friends, if you want to watch the super hit movie The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, in English, then make sure to like this video. And if you are visiting our channel for the very first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more amazing updates about upcoming movies and entertainment news. In today's video, we are going to talk about The Ugly Stepsister, 2025. We will explore what this movie is about, where you can watch it, and reveal some fascinating behind-the-scenes facts. I will also guide you through all the important aspects, including its technical departments, music, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, and box office performance. Along with that, we will provide a concise story overview, discuss the plot, and share a short review. Towards the end, we will also break down the performances of the main cast members, mention who played which role, and highlight the standout moments that make this film special. So stay tuned till the end to get complete information about The Ugly Stepsister, 2025. The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, is a reimagined modern fantasy drama film inspired by the classic Cinderella story but told from the perspective of the stepsister. The movie offers a refreshing and emotional twist, exploring themes of jealousy, redemption, and inner beauty. It dives deep into the untold side of the famous fairy tale, showing how every story has more than one version. This film has been praised for its storytelling, emotional depth, and powerful performances, making it one of the most talked-about fantasy releases of 2025. The movie's pre-production began in late 2023 when the screenplay was finalized. The director wanted to portray the stepsister not as a one-dimensional villain but as a complex character with emotions, insecurities, and motivations. During the early stages, a lot of time was spent on character design, costume research, and setting the right tone. The production team aimed to keep the magical atmosphere of a fairy tale while grounding it in realistic emotions. The script went through several drafts to ensure that it maintained a balance between fantasy and heartfelt drama. Filming for The Ugly Stepsister started in early 2024 and took place across several beautiful European locations. The production used both natural landscapes and set designs to create a visually rich world. The cinematography captures every detail with elegance, from the grandeur of royal castles to the intimate emotions of the characters. The director used a mix of practical effects and CGI to bring the fairy tale elements to life while keeping them believable. The lighting, color palette, and camera work all contribute to the emotional tone of the movie, helping audiences feel connected to the characters' journeys. The music of The Ugly Stepsister plays a major role in setting the mood. The film's soundtrack combines orchestral arrangements with soft vocal pieces that reflect the emotional evolution of the main character. The background score enhances every key scene, from moments of heartbreak to scenes of triumph and self-discovery. The music composer, known for blending classical and modern elements, has created a score that stays with you even after the movie ends. Post-production work involved careful editing and sound design to ensure a smooth flow. The editing team worked to maintain the emotional pacing of the story while keeping the audience engaged throughout. The visual effects team enhanced several magical sequences, giving them a polished yet natural appearance. The color grading added warmth and contrast to match the film's fairy tale yet realistic aesthetic. As for the budget, The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, was made with a moderate but well-utilized budget. The filmmakers focused on storytelling and performance rather than over-the-top special effects. Despite its modest budget, the film has performed strongly at the box office, exceeding expectations and becoming a surprise hit. Critics have praised it for its emotional storytelling and strong character development. The cast of The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, includes a talented mix of established stars and rising newcomers. The lead actress, who plays the stepsister, delivers a heartfelt and layered performance, showing both vulnerability and strength. Her portrayal allows viewers to understand the character's struggles, mistakes, and eventual transformation. The supporting cast, including the actors who play Cinderella, the prince, and the stepmother, also give strong performances that elevate the entire story. Each actor fits perfectly into their role, making every interaction meaningful. The story centers on the misunderstood stepsister, who grows up in the shadow of Cinderella. The film explores her insecurities, her desire for love and recognition, and the choices that lead her down a complicated path. As the story unfolds, we see her realizing her own worth and finding redemption. The plot offers valuable lessons about forgiveness, empathy, and the danger of judging others too quickly. In conclusion, The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, is more than just a reimagined fairy tale. It is a deeply emotional story about human nature, personal growth, and the power of self-acceptance. The combination of strong direction, impressive performances, captivating visuals, and touching music makes it a must-watch for audiences who love meaningful fantasy films. So make sure to watch the movie and experience this beautiful twist on a classic story. The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, is a modern reimagining of the classic Cinderella story, told from the perspective of the stepsister. This film moves away from the traditional fairy tale approach and instead dives into the emotions, struggles, and complexities of a young woman who has always been seen as the antagonist. The story presents a dark yet emotional journey about self-worth, jealousy, and the desire to be loved. It is a dramatic mix of fantasy, realism, and emotional depth that makes it stand out from the usual adaptations. The film is directed by Emilie Blichfeldt and stars Lea Myren as Elvira, Thea Sofie Loch Næss as Agnes, Eindal Torp as Rebecca, Flo Fagerli as Alma, Isaac Kamrath as Prince Julian, Malte Gardinger as Isaac, and Ralph Carlson as Otto. Each of them delivers a strong performance that makes the story feel both believable and emotionally moving. The movie begins in a quiet village where Rebecca, a widow, is determined to secure a better future for her two daughters, Elvira and Alma. To achieve this, she marries Otto, a wealthy widower with a beautiful daughter named Agnes. However, her dream of stability quickly turns into chaos when Otto suddenly dies on their wedding day. Rebecca and her daughters are left in a difficult situation, struggling to maintain their social status and survive financially. Agnes, who is naturally kind and beautiful, becomes the focus of jealousy and resentment within the household. Elvira, played by Lea Myren, is constantly reminded that she is not as beautiful as her stepsister. Her mother pressures her to improve her appearance and manners to secure a good marriage, especially with the charming and powerful Prince Julian. What begins as innocent encouragement soon turns into an obsession. Rebecca forces Elvira into painful and harmful beauty treatments, hoping to transform her daughter into the ideal image of perfection. These procedures include strict diets, dangerous old-fashioned cosmetic practices, and countless humiliating rituals that slowly destroy Elvira's confidence and physical health. As time passes, Elvira's envy toward Agnes grows stronger. She watches as Agnes easily wins admiration and affection from others, including the prince. Agnes, unaware of the depth of Elvira's pain, tries to remain kind and supportive, but her natural grace only fuels the bitterness around her. Alma, the youngest sister, becomes a silent observer of the family's growing tension. She represents innocence and love but is unable to stop the toxic atmosphere created by their mother. When the royal ball is announced, Rebecca sees it as the final chance for Elvira to achieve everything she has been pushed toward. She prepares Elvira obsessively, forcing her through painful routines to make her ready for the prince. Agnes, too, is invited to the ball, unaware of the jealousy that surrounds her. At the event, the grand hall is filled with nobles and elegance. Agnes captivates everyone's attention, especially Prince Julian's. Elvira's attempt to compete with her ends in embarrassment and physical exhaustion. In a desperate act, she tries to fit into Agnes's slipper after the prince begins searching for the mysterious girl he danced with. This act becomes symbolic of Elvira's struggle to force herself into someone else's role, someone she was never meant to be. The climax of the story unfolds with shocking intensity. Elvira, realizing the depth of her self-destruction, confronts her mother and finally breaks free from her control. The emotional confrontation between Elvira and Rebecca exposes years of pressure, manipulation, and insecurity. Rebecca admits that her obsession with beauty and social acceptance was driven by her own failures and fears. Elvira's realization marks the beginning of her transformation, not into a beautiful princess, but into a person who accepts herself beyond looks and social approval. In the final act, Elvira chooses to walk away from the toxic environment that has defined her life. She understands that happiness cannot be found in competing with others or meeting impossible standards. Agnes, too, gains maturity through the experience, learning that kindness and beauty are not enough to shield anyone from pain. The film ends on a quiet yet powerful note, showing Elvira finding peace and purpose on her own terms. The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, is not just a fairy tale retelling but a story about human emotions, family pressure, and society's unrealistic standards of beauty. It questions how far people will go to be accepted and loved, and what happens when that desire turns destructive. The performances, especially by Lea Myren as Elvira and Ain Dahl Torp as Rebecca, make the story emotionally gripping. The direction, cinematography, and soundtrack work together to create a hauntingly beautiful atmosphere. Overall, The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, delivers a deep and thought-provoking story. It turns a well-known fairy tale into a powerful emotional drama that focuses on self-acceptance, forgiveness, and the courage to find one's true worth. It is a movie that stays with you long after it ends because it reminds us that every story has more than one side, and sometimes the so-called villain just needed to be understood. The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, opens with a striking image that sets the tone for the rest of the film. The camera follows Elvira, the main character, as she looks at her reflection in an old mirror, adjusting her hair and practicing a forced smile. This simple yet powerful opening shot tells us everything about her, an insecure young woman constantly trying to meet impossible expectations. The tone is melancholic but curious, preparing the audience for a journey that explores the cost of beauty, jealousy, and self-acceptance. The setup introduces us to the family dynamics and social environment. Rebecca, a strong but controlling widow, marries Otto, a wealthy widower with a beautiful daughter named Agnes. Rebecca's goal is to secure a stable future for herself and her two daughters, Elvira and Alma. However, fate turns cruel when Otto dies suddenly on their wedding day, leaving the family trapped in financial uncertainty. From this point, the household becomes a mix of desperation, resentment, and social anxiety. Agnes's natural beauty and kindness make her the center of attention, which deepens Elvira's feelings of jealousy and inadequacy. The contrast between the two girls is established early. One represents effortless grace, while the other is painfully self-conscious. The inciting incident comes when Rebecca decides that Elvira must win the attention of Prince Julian at an upcoming royal ball. Rebecca's obsession with appearances takes over their lives. She imposes strict beauty regimens on Elvira, harsh diets, uncomfortable posture training, and painful cosmetic procedures. This turning point marks the beginning of Elvira's internal conflict. She doesn't just want to impress the prince, she wants to be loved and seen as beautiful in her own right. The emotional weight of the film grows here as we begin to understand her motivation and pain. The rising action unfolds through a series of intense and emotionally charged scenes that show the transformation of Elvira, both physically and mentally. The film takes its time exploring her slow breakdown. Each day, she loses a part of herself under the pressure of her mother's expectations. Rebecca's love becomes controlling, manipulative, and suffocating. Meanwhile, Agnes remains gentle and compassionate, but her natural goodness becomes a silent accusation against Elvira's bitterness. One particularly haunting scene shows Elvira secretly observing Agnes laughing with Prince Julian during a garden event. The jealousy and self-hate in Elvira's expression make this one of the film's strongest emotional beats. Around the midpoint, the story takes a dramatic turn. Elvira's obsession reaches a dangerous level when she tries to harm herself in an attempt to alter her appearance. This moment is both shocking and heartbreaking, showing how deeply society's and her mother's expectations have poisoned her self-image. It's also the film's emotional center, an unflinching look at the damage caused by constant comparison. After this event, the story begins to shift. Elvira starts questioning whether she's chasing something real or a fantasy created by others. The ball sequence serves as the film's most visually stunning and narratively crucial section. The editing becomes more rhythmic, the music swells, and the lighting creates a dreamlike atmosphere. Agnes appears like a true fairy tale figure, effortlessly drawing the crowd's attention. Elvira, pushed by her mother, tries to compete, but her exhaustion and emotional turmoil lead to her public humiliation. When Prince Julian dances with Agnes, the heartbreak on Elvira's face captures the full tragedy of her journey. This moment marks the breaking point between illusion and reality. After the ball, the story enters its falling action, where the focus shifts from competition to realization. Elvira confronts Rebecca in a tense and emotional argument. Rebecca's obsession with perfection is revealed to be rooted in her own insecurities and fear of failure. The dialogue between them is powerful, showing the cycle of pain passed from mother to daughter. This confrontation is one of the key turning points of the film because it finally releases Elvira from her emotional imprisonment. The final act leads toward quiet but meaningful closure. Elvira, physically and emotionally scarred, decides to leave behind the toxic environment that has defined her life. The pacing slows down, giving the audience time to process her growth. The cinematography becomes softer, symbolizing freedom and rebirth. Agnes also experiences her own transformation. She learns that beauty and kindness are not enough to protect someone from pain. Both characters find their separate paths to peace, showing that redemption and understanding can come even after immense suffering. The narrative follows a mostly linear structure but plays with emotional pacing rather than time jumps. It reveals information gradually, allowing viewers to uncover deeper motivations behind each character's actions. By keeping the story grounded and intimate, the film ensures that every emotional peak feels earned. Each turning point, Otto's death, Rebecca's obsession, Elvira's breakdown, the ball, and the final confrontation, pushes the story forward while deepening the emotional connection with the audience. The film ends with Elvira looking at her reflection once again, similar to the opening shot. But this time, she smiles naturally, not forced. It's a quiet moment of victory, symbolizing her acceptance of herself. The final beat is not about romance or social triumph but inner peace. The circular structure of the opening and closing scenes emphasizes how much she has changed. The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, uses its narrative not just to retell a fairy tale but to explore the painful and beautiful process of self-discovery. It is a story about breaking cycles, finding authenticity, and realizing that true worth comes from within. The character development in The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, is one of the film's strongest and most emotionally layered aspects. Each major character undergoes a personal transformation that mirrors the film's deeper themes of identity, insecurity, and the struggle for acceptance. Rather than relying on simple good versus evil dynamics, the film focuses on emotional realism, exploring how pain, love, and ambition shape human behavior. The result is a complex portrait of characters who feel alive, flawed, and deeply relatable. At the center of the story is Elvira, played by Lea Myren, the so-called ugly stepsister. When the movie begins, she is a timid and self-conscious young woman who has grown up constantly compared to others, especially her stepsister Agnes. She wants to be seen as beautiful, valuable, and deserving of love. Her entire identity is shaped by the opinions of those around her, particularly her mother. Elvira's early gestures, like the way she forces a smile in the mirror or adjusts her posture nervously, show how uncomfortable she is in her own skin. She speaks softly, avoids confrontation, and hides behind politeness, but her eyes often reveal the sadness of someone who feels invisible. Her main obstacle is her lack of self-worth. She believes that unless she looks perfect, she cannot be loved. Throughout the film, we see Elvira's internal conflict deepen as she tries to please her mother and win admiration but loses touch with who she truly is. As the story progresses, Elvira's transformation becomes painful yet profound. The ball sequence marks a major emotional shift for her. When she watches Prince Julian dance with Agnes, she finally realizes that beauty alone will never give her happiness. The humiliation she faces breaks her, but that moment of despair also plants the first seed of self-awareness. Later, her confrontation with her mother becomes the emotional climax of her character arc. For the first time, she refuses to obey and speaks out about how Rebecca's expectations have destroyed her confidence. This confrontation represents her rebirth. By the end of the film, Elvira has changed completely. She no longer seeks validation from others. The final scene, where she smiles naturally at her reflection, shows that she has accepted herself as she is. Her journey from insecurity to self-acceptance is the film's emotional heart. Rebecca, played by Eindal Torp, is both an antagonist and a tragic figure. When we first meet her, she appears controlling and manipulative, a mother obsessed with appearances and social standing. But as the film unfolds, her actions reveal a deeper layer of insecurity. She is a woman who once dreamed of love and status but ended up defined by fear of poverty, judgment, and failure. Rebecca's obsession with Elvira's beauty is not only about her daughter, it is about correcting her own perceived mistakes. One of the most telling moments of her character comes during a quiet scene when she stares at an old portrait of herself, whispering that she used to be beautiful. That brief line exposes the root of her cruelty, regret, and self-loathing. Her relationship with Elvira is both loving and destructive, and their final argument is where her character truly breaks. For the first time, she admits that her harshness came from love mixed with fear. Rebecca does not transform as completely as Elvira, but she gains a moment of clarity, an awareness that she has harmed the very person she wanted to protect. Agnes, played by Thea Sofie Loch Næss, begins as the embodiment of beauty and grace, almost too perfect to be real. She seems gentle and kind, unaware of the resentment she causes. However, as the story develops, we see that Agnes carries her own burden. She is tired of being valued only for her looks and kindness. There is a subtle shift in her tone midway through the film, especially when she tells Elvira, "Sometimes it hurts to be what everyone wants you to be." This line marks her internal conflict. By the end, Agnes matures emotionally, realizing that sympathy is not enough to mend broken relationships. Her decision to forgive but walk away from the toxic environment shows quiet strength. Prince Julian, played by Isaac Kamroth, functions as both a symbol and a character. He represents societal approval and the illusion of validation. His interest in Agnes and indifference toward Elvira highlight how superficial admiration can be. However, his character also evolves slightly when he sees the chaos caused by obsession with perfection. He becomes aware of how his actions have fueled rivalry, and in the final scenes, he expresses remorse in a simple but telling way, by refusing to take part in the royal selection ceremony that objectifies women. Alma, the youngest sister, portrayed by Flo Fagerli, serves as a quiet observer of the family's downfall. Her innocence contrasts with the bitterness of the older characters. She rarely speaks, but her presence in key scenes, like when she holds Elvira's hand after the ball, represents hope and emotional grounding. She is the moral compass of the story, reminding the audience that love and empathy can still exist even in chaos. Each character in The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, mirrors a different side of human insecurity. Elvira's arc reflects the pain of self-doubt, Rebecca's embodies the weight of regret, and Agnes's explores the limits of beauty. Together, they form a web of relationships built on comparison, misunderstanding, and eventual healing. The film's subtle gestures, an unfinished sentence, a shared glance, a single tear, communicate more than dialogue ever could. By the end, every character has confronted the truth about themselves, and though not all find peace, they each grow in their own way. The story becomes not just about a fairy tale retold, but about the quiet, painful process of discovering one's true self. The performances in The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, form the emotional backbone of the film, shaping its tone and carrying its themes beyond the script. Each actor brings a distinct energy that either enhances or slightly detracts from the story's rhythm. The lead actress portraying the so-called ugly stepsister delivers a performance that is layered with vulnerability, quiet strength, and a deep internal conflict that resonates throughout the film. She does not play the role as a caricature of bitterness or envy, but rather as a woman who has grown up in the shadow of unrealistic expectations and cruel comparisons. Her physicality is subtle yet powerful. A hesitant glance, a faltering smile, or a nervous hand gesture speaks volumes about years of emotional neglect. Her voice trembles when she speaks of her desires, But when she finally asserts herself, there is an undeniable confidence that transforms the entire film's energy. This evolution feels authentic because the actress understands not just the dialogue but the silences that shape her character's pain. The actress playing the glamorous stepsister offers a sharp contrast. Her performance radiates charm and control, yet there are fleeting moments where cracks appear in her confidence, hinting at an inner emptiness beneath her perfection. She masters the rhythm of dialogue, using tone and pace to control every interaction. Her chemistry with the protagonist is complex, oscillating between rivalry and reluctant affection. While her portrayal at times borders on theatrical, it works in the context of her character's need for attention. The performance is deliberately exaggerated to expose the superficiality that defines her world. It is in the quieter scenes, however, where she surprises the audience by revealing a more fragile, human side. These glimpses of sincerity add nuance to what could have easily been a one-dimensional character. The actor playing the prince avoids the common trope of a shallow romantic lead. He brings a surprising warmth and humor to the role, grounding the fantasy in emotional truth. His interactions with both stepsisters are filled with genuine curiosity rather than romantic idealization. His chemistry with the lead feels organic. It develops gradually, through shared understanding rather than grand gestures. His timing in emotional scenes is impeccable, and he uses silence effectively, letting expressions replace unnecessary dialogue. There are moments when his delivery could have benefited from a stronger sense of urgency, but overall, he gives the character a refreshing depth and kindness that challenges the film's social dynamics. Among the supporting cast, the actress playing the stepmother stands out as a scene stealer. She manages to humanize a role that is often portrayed as purely villainous. Her performance blends cruelty with charm, using controlled speech and elegant gestures to project authority. What makes her portrayal so engaging is her ability to shift from composed manipulation to raw frustration within seconds. Her confrontation scenes are executed with precision, her words cutting through the air with calm intensity. She dominates every frame she appears in, yet never overshadows the emotional focus of the story. The supporting characters, including the household staff and village women, provide texture and humor to the film. They fill the background with life, creating a believable world that reacts to the central drama. One particular character, a quiet servant who observes more than he speaks, becomes a subtle emotional anchor. His brief scenes convey empathy without words, and his silent recognition of the stepsister's struggle adds a layer of humanity that complements the main narrative. Even the minor characters are directed to serve the emotional tone. There are no wasted performances, though a few actors occasionally fall out of sync with the story's pacing. In certain comedic moments, the humor feels forced, as if the actors are performing for the camera rather than within the world of the film. Still, these moments are rare and do not disrupt the overall flow. The chemistry among the ensemble is one of the film's strongest elements. Group scenes, especially those filled with tension, gossip, or silent judgment, are alive with subtext. The actors seem to listen to each other, responding with genuine emotional cues rather than rehearsed beats. This gives the film a sense of spontaneity that keeps viewers engaged. What truly elevates the performances in The Ugly Stepsister is the attention to emotional detail. The cast collectively understands the film's message about identity, beauty, and self-worth. Every gesture, pause, and look contributes to that central idea. The performances turn a familiar fairy tale premise into something deeply personal and believable. Even when the dialogue leans toward fantasy or melodrama, the actor's sincerity keeps it grounded. In the end, it is not the grand speeches but the quiet exchanges that linger in memory. A hesitant glance between sisters, a moment of forgiveness, a shared smile after years of resentment. These are the moments that make the performances memorable. The actors breathe life into archetypes, transforming them into real people with fears, regrets, and hopes. Their collective effort ensures that The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, is not just a visual or narrative success but an emotionally resonant experience built on human truth. The direction of The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, is one of its most defining aspects, shaping the film's tone, rhythm, and emotional resonance from beginning to end. The director's vision is clear and deliberate, presenting a reimagined fairy tale world that balances realism with fantasy. Every choice, from camera movement to scene composition, feels calculated to draw the audience into the emotional heart of the story. What stands out most is the director's restraint. Rather than relying on exaggerated drama or overused fantasy tropes, the film focuses on atmosphere and character psychology. This approach gives the story a sense of intimacy, making viewers feel like they are observing real emotions unfolding within an imagined world. The pacing is measured and steady, allowing key emotional moments to breathe without feeling slow. The director avoids rushing character development, instead giving space for silence, hesitation, and subtle gestures. This slower rhythm helps the audience understand the complex inner worlds of the characters, particularly the protagonist. However, there are moments where the pacing drifts slightly, especially in the middle act where scenes linger longer than necessary. These sections might test the patience of some viewers, but they also reflect the director's confidence in allowing emotion to unfold naturally rather than forcing momentum. The film's overall tone maintains a delicate balance between melancholy and hope, guided by the director's careful attention to visual and emotional detail. Stylistically, the director shows a preference for long tracking shots that follow characters through their environment, emphasizing their isolation or transformation. These shots are not merely decorative, they reveal emotional states through movement. For example, the camera often trails behind the protagonist as she walks through large, dimly lit spaces, highlighting how small she feels in a world that undervalues her. The use of atmospheric close-ups also adds to this emotional depth. The camera lingers on faces, hands, and glances, capturing the tension and vulnerability that words cannot express. Each frame feels like a painting, carefully composed to reflect mood and meaning. Lighting plays an essential role in the director's storytelling. The early scenes are bathed in muted tones and shadowy contrasts, symbolizing emotional repression and social hierarchy. As the story progresses and the protagonist begins to find her voice, the lighting gradually shifts toward warmer, softer hues. This transformation feels organic, a visual metaphor for personal growth and self-acceptance. The director's control over these visual elements demonstrates a strong understanding of how cinematography and emotion intertwine. Every light source, reflection, and shade contributes to the psychological atmosphere of the film. In terms of actor direction, the film reveals a director who values subtlety and emotional truth. Performances are natural and grounded, with no trace of melodrama. The actors seem deeply attuned to each other's rhythms, suggesting that the director encouraged collaboration and improvisation within a structured vision. The most powerful scenes often rely on nonverbal communication, looks, pauses, and shifts in body language that speak louder than dialogue. This sensitivity to human behavior gives the film its quiet intensity. The director seems to understand that real emotion often lies between words, and the result is a deeply immersive viewing experience. One of the director's notable strengths is the ability to merge fantasy with realism. The fairy tale elements are not treated as spectacle but as emotional symbolism. The grand ballroom scenes, for instance, are shot with the same intimacy as the quiet kitchen moments, making both settings feel equally important. This consistent focus on emotional authenticity ensures that the film's magical elements never overshadow the human story at its core. It is a bold choice that pays off, giving the film a mature and reflective tone rarely found in fairy tale adaptations. That said, not every directorial decision lands perfectly. A few stylistic flourishes, such as sudden slow-motion sequences or overly symbolic imagery, feel slightly self-conscious. These moments briefly disrupt the flow, calling attention to the technique rather than the emotion. Similarly, while the minimalistic soundtrack enhances many scenes, there are instances where the silence feels too prolonged, creating a sense of emotional distance. These choices, though minor, remind the viewer that the director's vision occasionally prioritizes aesthetic experimentation over storytelling momentum. Still, even these imperfections contribute to the film's identity. The director takes risks, and not all of them work, but the ambition behind each choice is evident. The film never feels formulaic or hollow. Instead, it carries the distinct voice of a filmmaker willing to trust the intelligence and sensitivity of the audience. The direction invites viewers to observe, interpret, and feel rather than merely consume the story. This sense of authorship gives The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, its emotional weight and artistic coherence. Ultimately, the director's vision defines the film's soul. Through thoughtful pacing, expressive visuals, and emotionally intelligent performances, they create a story that feels timeless yet deeply personal. The director's guidance ensures that every department, from acting to cinematography, works toward a unified emotional purpose. Even when the film falters in rhythm or clarity, its direction remains confident and purposeful. The result is a film that feels crafted with care, heart, and insight. The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, becomes not just a reinterpretation of a classic tale but a statement on empathy, perception, and the quiet courage it takes to reclaim one's identity, all brought to life through a director's unwavering creative vision. The cinematography of The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, plays a crucial role in transforming a familiar fairy tale premise into a visually poetic and emotionally layered experience. From the opening frame to the closing scene, the camera's gaze tells its own story, a story of contrast between illusion and truth, grandeur and vulnerability, beauty and neglect. The cinematographer's work here is not just decorative, it is an essential storytelling tool that mirrors the emotional journey of the characters while creating a distinctive tone that separates this adaptation from typical fantasy dramas. Every shot feels intentional, designed to immerse the viewer in both the external world and the inner lives of its characters. The film opens with a carefully framed wide shot of a mist-covered manor, its faded elegance symbolizing decay beneath beauty. The choice to begin with stillness immediately sets the mood, haunting, quiet, and filled with unspoken tension. Throughout the first act, the cinematography emphasizes spatial distance and emotional detachment. The stepsisters and their mother are often captured in symmetrical compositions that suggest control and confinement, while the protagonist is frequently placed off-center, visually reinforcing her outsider status within her own home. These framing techniques subtly express hierarchy and emotional imbalance without a single word of dialogue. As the story progresses, camera movement becomes more fluid, reflecting the protagonist's growing sense of self-awareness and freedom. In early scenes, the camera remains static or restricted to controlled pans, mirroring her cautious existence under constant scrutiny. However, once she begins to assert herself, the cinematography adopts more dynamic movements, gentle tracking shots that follow her steps as she explores new spaces and takes emotional risks. These visual transitions parallel her inner evolution and give the audience a physical sense of her transformation. The cinematographer's ability to weave emotion into movement ensures that each shift in perspective feels earned and meaningful. Lighting plays a profound role in establishing the film's emotional tone. The early segments are dominated by cool, muted hues, bluish grays, soft browns, and dim candlelight that evoke the sense of a world drained of warmth. The use of naturalistic lighting gives the film an almost painterly texture, as though the scenes could have been lit by the glow of a single window or the flicker of a fire. This subdued lighting design reflects the emotional repression and moral ambiguity surrounding the characters. As the story deepens, warm tones begin to seep into the frame. Golds and ambers accompany moments of truth and empathy, while high-contrast shadows reappear whenever deception or jealousy takes hold. By the final act, the lighting reaches a delicate equilibrium, neither fully bright nor entirely dim, symbolizing emotional clarity without perfection. Color grading further enhances the film's emotional language. The palette is restrained, steering away from the saturated fantasy colors typical of fairy tale adaptations. Instead, it uses desaturated pastels and earthy tones to ground the story in realism. Occasional bursts of color are used strategically, a vibrant blue dress signaling liberation, a crimson curtain suggesting hidden rage, a golden sunset marking reconciliation. These color moments act as emotional punctuation, guiding the viewer's subconscious reactions to the unfolding narrative. The cinematographer's disciplined approach ensures that the color never distracts but always deepens the storytelling. Framing choices are consistently intelligent and symbolic. The film alternates between wide shots and intimate close-ups with purpose. Wide shots emphasize isolation, characters dwarfed by architecture, lost in long corridors, or framed against vast landscapes that make them appear small and insignificant. These visuals create a feeling of distance not only between characters but also between individuals and the world's expectations of them. In contrast, the tight framing in emotionally charged scenes pulls the audience into intimate psychological spaces. A trembling hand, a tear reflected in candlelight, or a lingering glance across the room speaks volumes. The cinematographer seems to understand that proximity can be more revealing than dialogue. Depth of field is also used expressively throughout the film. Shallow focus isolates characters within crowded scenes, suggesting emotional detachment or obsession, while deep focus invites the audience to notice the environment as an extension of the story. For example, during the ballroom sequence, the camera maintains a deep focus that captures both the glittering surface of the event and the subtle tension in the background, where jealousy and ambition quietly simmer. The visual contrast between foreground and background deepens the sense of duality at the film's core: appearance versus reality, beauty versus emptiness. Another standout element is the cinematographer's use of reflective surfaces and framing within frames. Mirrors, windows, and doorways recur throughout the film, symbolizing perception and identity. These visual motifs suggest that every character sees only fragments of themselves and others. One memorable shot places the protagonist's reflection in a cracked mirror as her stepsister's laughter echoes off-screen, a moment that visually conveys both her emotional fracture and her growing self-awareness. This imagery gives the film's psychological depth and visual unity. Even the camera's texture contributes to the storytelling. Slightly grainy visuals in early scenes evoke a sense of nostalgia and imperfection, while later sequences adopt cleaner, sharper images, reflecting clarity and renewal. This progression in image texture mirrors the narrative arc, showing how visual design can evolve with emotional growth. Ultimately, the cinematography of The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, achieves something rare. It is both beautiful and meaningful. Every lighting choice, every framing decision, and every movement serves the story rather than merely decorating it. The cinematographer and director work in harmony to create a cohesive visual language that reveals inner worlds, evokes empathy, and sustains tension. The result is a film that not only engages the eye but also stirs the heart, proving that in capable hands, the camera is not just a tool of observation but a profound storyteller in its own right. The editing and pacing of The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, are among the most quietly powerful aspects of its storytelling, shaping not only the rhythm of the narrative but also the viewer's emotional experience. From the first frame, it becomes clear that the editor's choices are driven by mood and meaning rather than speed or spectacle. The film moves with a deliberate rhythm that reflects its themes of perception, transformation, and self-worth. The editing avoids flashy transitions or chaotic cutting. Instead, it allows each moment to unfold naturally, letting silence and stillness carry as much weight as dialogue or music. This approach may feel unhurried at times, but it creates a rhythm that matches the tone of the story: reflective, emotional, and human. The opening act is cut with restraint. Scenes are allowed to linger just long enough for the audience to absorb both the environment and the emotional state of the characters. The transitions between scenes are smooth and almost invisible, giving the sense that time flows continuously rather than being fragmented. This slow pacing is intentional, immersing viewers in the protagonist's stagnant world where days blend together and emotional suffocation is constant. The editor uses long dissolves and fade-ins rather than hard cuts, reinforcing the dreamlike atmosphere that defines the film's beginning. The rhythm mirrors the character's internal stillness before change begins. As the story progresses and tension builds, the pacing subtly accelerates. The editor introduces quicker transitions and shorter scene durations, particularly during the middle act, where the emotional and narrative stakes rise. This gradual shift in tempo reflects the protagonist's awakening, her growing realization of her own value and power. The editing becomes slightly more dynamic, but never jarring. Even during more intense moments, such as confrontations or emotional revelations, the cuts are motivated by performance and emotion rather than action. The editor's sensitivity to pacing allows the film to maintain cohesion while gradually building momentum. One of the most effective editing choices in The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, is its use of montage. Instead of traditional fast-paced sequences designed purely to move time forward, the montages here serve emotional and thematic purposes. A particularly memorable sequence shows the protagonist preparing for an important event, intercut with brief flashbacks to moments of humiliation and exclusion from her past. The contrast between present confidence and past pain is heightened through rhythmic editing. The shots are balanced between long takes and quick glimpses, creating a pulse that feels like a heartbeat. This editing approach transforms the montage into a psychological window rather than a mere narrative shortcut. Flashbacks are handled with care throughout the film. Rather than using obvious visual cues or jarring cuts, they flow organically into the present timeline. The editor employs subtle color shifts and changes in texture to indicate transitions in time, maintaining visual continuity while still signaling a shift in memory. These scenes are often cut in parallel with current moments, inviting viewers to draw emotional connections between past and present without overt exposition. The cross-cutting between timelines deepens our understanding of the protagonist's motivations and relationships, making each return to the present more meaningful. In terms of rhythm across acts, the editor demonstrates strong control. The first act establishes atmosphere and tone, the second act develops conflict and emotional turbulence, and the third act delivers resolution without losing composure. The pacing in the final act is particularly well judged. It neither rushes toward closure nor lingers unnecessarily. The editor understands that emotional payoff comes not from speed but from precision, knowing exactly when to cut and when to hold. The final scenes are allowed to breathe, with pauses that feel earned and silence that feels deliberate. The restraint in these moments is what gives the ending its quiet power. The film also uses cross-cutting effectively to build suspense and thematic tension. During key turning points, the editor weaves together parallel actions, one character facing a personal reckoning while another takes a decisive step that alters the story's direction. This technique amplifies emotional impact without relying on action or external drama. The editor's decision to align emotional beats rather than chronological events creates a layered narrative rhythm that keeps the viewer engaged on both intellectual and emotional levels. Silence plays a vital role in the film's editing rhythm. Unlike many modern dramas that rely on music or dialogue to maintain energy, The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, often trusts quiet moments to carry emotion. The editor gives space to ambient sounds, the creak of a floorboard, the rustle of fabric, the soft exhale of breath. These moments of stillness are not filler, they are part of the storytelling rhythm, giving the audience time to reflect and empathize. This trust in silence demonstrates confidence in both the material and the audience's patience. Of course, the film is not without minor pacing issues. The middle section, while emotionally rich, occasionally lingers longer than necessary on transitional scenes. A few sequences could have benefited from tighter editing to maintain tension and narrative flow. However, these slower stretches also contribute to the film's contemplative mood, so whether they feel like flaws or features depends largely on the viewer's expectations. The editor clearly prioritizes emotional continuity over speed, and in doing so, creates a rhythm that feels organic and immersive. In conclusion, the editing and pacing of The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, are masterclasses in restraint and emotional rhythm. The editor crafts a visual tempo that mirrors the protagonist's inner transformation, slow and uncertain at first, then gradually building toward clarity and release. Transitions are fluid, montages are purposeful, and flashbacks are woven seamlessly into the narrative fabric. The pacing never panders to modern impatience but instead honors the emotional truth of each scene. Every cut feels motivated by character rather than plot mechanics, giving the film a sense of integrity and depth. Through its editing, The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, achieves a rare harmony between time, tension, and emotion, proving that thoughtful pacing can be just as powerful as any visual spectacle. The soundtrack and score of The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, are integral to its emotional texture, functioning not merely as background accompaniment but as an active force guiding the audience through the film's inner landscape. Music in this film feels alive, each note, silence, and motif designed to reflect the characters' states of mind, the evolution of relationships, and the underlying tension between beauty and imperfection. The composer and sound team appear to understand that this story, rooted in emotional transformation, demands a score that balances delicacy with power. As a result, the soundtrack weaves seamlessly into the narrative, shaping both mood and meaning in ways that elevate nearly every scene. From the very beginning, music sets the tone for the film's atmosphere. The opening sequence introduces a slow, melancholic piano melody underscored by faint strings, evoking both nostalgia and unease. This recurring motif becomes associated with the protagonist, subtly evolving throughout the story as she changes. Early on, the melody is played in minor key variations, sparse and hesitant, reflecting her emotional fragility and the weight of being overlooked. As the narrative progresses, the same theme reappears in fuller arrangements, incorporating warm cello and soft percussion, mirroring her growing strength and self-awareness. This transformation in the score parallels her journey in a way that feels organic and emotionally resonant. The film's sound design also gives music room to breathe. Silence plays a major role in how the score operates. Instead of filling every emotional pause with sound, the director and composer use silence as contrast, allowing the audience to feel the emptiness of certain moments. When music returns after these quiet stretches, its impact is amplified. One particularly striking example occurs during a confrontation scene between the protagonist and her stepmother. The scene begins with silence, broken only by natural ambient sounds, and as tension rises, a faint low-frequency drone creeps in, barely audible but emotionally powerful. The lack of traditional melody in this moment forces the viewer to confront discomfort directly, proving that restraint can often be more expressive than excess. Throughout the film, recurring musical cues are tied to specific emotions and relationships. The stepsisters' appearances are often accompanied by light, ornate instrumentation, harpsichord flourishes or playful woodwinds that mask cruelty with elegance. This musical irony cleverly mirrors their shallow personalities, presenting them as polished on the surface but hollow underneath. In contrast, scenes featuring the protagonist alone or in reflection rely on stripped-down compositions, solo piano or violin, that emphasize vulnerability and sincerity. This musical contrast not only differentiates characters but also reinforces the film's central theme, the difference between what appears beautiful and what truly is. The romantic subplot benefits greatly from the film's score. Instead of overbearing orchestral swells typical of fairy tale romance, the composer opts for minimalistic motifs, soft guitar, muted strings, and gentle rhythmic pulses that build subtly beneath dialogue. The restraint allows chemistry and emotion to emerge naturally without manipulation. A standout moment comes when the two characters share a quiet conversation rather than a grand declaration. The score slowly builds beneath their words, weaving a faint motif heard earlier in the film, signaling emotional recognition rather than sudden love. The music becomes a bridge between their shared silences, turning a simple exchange into a deeply felt moment. Licensed music is used sparingly but effectively. The few contemporary tracks that appear are carefully chosen to connect the timeless fairy tale world to modern emotion. A mid-film montage uses a haunting indie track with echoing vocals and minimalist percussion to mark a shift in the protagonist's perspective. The song's lyrics subtly mirror her internal struggle, and its placement avoids feeling commercial or forced. This delicate blend of score and song shows the film's careful attention to tone, never letting modern sound break the emotional authenticity of the narrative. Another powerful sequence demonstrating the film's sonic design is the ballroom scene, where music becomes an extension of character psychology. The waltz that begins the scene is lush and grand, but as the protagonist steps into the room, the sound subtly changes. The orchestration thins out, leaving just a few instruments as if the world narrows around her. The shift is nearly imperceptible, but it mirrors her sense of isolation amid opulence. As the scene progresses and her confidence grows, the full orchestra returns, symbolizing her reclaiming of space and identity. The editing and sound mix work in harmony here, ensuring that the audience feels the emotional transformation through the change in sound dynamics. At times, the score risks overplaying its hand. A few emotional moments, particularly in the final act, lean on swelling strings that border on melodramatic. While the intention is clear, these cues slightly disrupt the subtlety that defines much of the film's musical tone. However, these are rare instances in an otherwise nuanced soundscape. The composer's restraint across most of the runtime makes the rare bursts of grandeur feel earned rather than excessive. One of the most memorable uses of sound comes near the end of the film. As the protagonist faces her final emotional realization, the score fades almost completely, leaving only the faint hum of wind and distant echoes of earlier motifs. It is as if the music itself is holding its breath. When the piano theme finally returns, this time in its most complete and confident form, it brings an overwhelming sense of closure. The evolution of that theme from fragility to strength encapsulates the entire journey in sound, a testament to the composer's emotional precision. In conclusion, the soundtrack and score of The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, elevate the film from a simple reimagining to a deeply immersive emotional experience. Through carefully constructed motifs, thoughtful silences, and selective use of licensed music, the film's sound design communicates as much as its visuals. Each musical cue feels purposeful, guiding the audience through the emotional shifts of the narrative without dictating their reactions. Even when it leans towards sentimentality, the score remains sincere and human. The result is a soundscape that lingers beyond the final credits, haunting, hopeful, and utterly inseparable from the story it helps to tell. The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, explores its story not just through plot twists or character arcs but through an intricate web of themes that give the film emotional and intellectual weight. Beneath the surface of its dramatic and often unsettling storyline lies a meditation on identity, self-perception, and the painful process of transformation. The film reimagines the familiar fairy tale framework but turns it into a psychological study of how people internalize the labels society gives them and how far they will go to rewrite their own narrative. At its core, the movie seems to ask whether beauty and belonging are external achievements or internal truths, and what it costs to pursue them in a world built on appearances. One of the film's strongest thematic threads is identity. The protagonist's journey is not simply about revenge or validation but about understanding who she is beyond the mask of rejection and jealousy. Throughout the movie, mirrors and reflections are recurring motifs, each scene offering a distorted or incomplete image that mirrors her fractured sense of self. Early on, her identity is defined by others, the cruel stepfamily, the indifferent townspeople, and the social order that rewards charm over sincerity. As the story progresses, the film subtly transitions from portraying her as a victim to showing her as an active agent reclaiming control. Yet, this empowerment is complicated. The more she shapes herself into what society demands, the further she drifts from her authentic core. This conflict between inner truth and outward illusion becomes one of the most haunting aspects of the narrative. The theme of revenge is woven tightly into this transformation. The protagonist's quest to prove herself or to make others suffer for their cruelty serves as both motivation and moral dilemma. The film never portrays revenge in black and white terms. Instead, it treats it as an emotional currency, momentarily satisfying but corrosive over time. In one pivotal scene, her triumph feels hollow because it mirrors the same cruelty she once despised. The movie thus poses a difficult question. Does reclaiming power justify becoming what you once hated? The answer, the film suggests, lies somewhere between justice and self-destruction. Redemption also surfaces as a major theme, though the film handles it with ambiguity. Rather than offering a clean resolution or moral lesson, it shows redemption as a fragile and often partial process. Certain characters find forgiveness in unexpected ways, while others remain trapped in cycles of resentment. What makes this exploration compelling is that the film doesn't rely on grand speeches to convey these ideas. Instead, redemption is expressed through visual storytelling, a hesitant gesture, a shared glance, or a quiet act of mercy. The restraint in how the movie handles moral awakening makes its emotional beats more authentic and thought-provoking. Power and class also play crucial roles. The movie critiques how social hierarchies shape people's destinies and identities. The Ugly Stepsister is not just an individual but a symbol of everyone marginalized by standards of beauty, wealth, or status. Through her story, the film exposes how society creates its own monsters by excluding those who don't conform. Power dynamics shift throughout the narrative, revealing how easily victims can become oppressors once they gain control. This cyclical portrayal of dominance and submission reinforces the film's darker message, that true liberation cannot be achieved through imitation of power but through transformation of one's self-perception. Fear, too, lingers at the film's core. It is fear of rejection, of inadequacy, of losing control. The atmosphere of tension is often built through small, intimate moments where the characters confront their vulnerabilities. Fear drives both the cruelty and compassion that unfold, making it the invisible hand shaping every decision. The film suggests that fear, rather than hatred, is the root of much of human conflict. Love, in contrast, operates as a quiet counterforce. Not the romantic ideal often seen in fairy tales, but a more complex, selfless love that emerges from understanding and empathy. There are moments where love redeems what revenge cannot, where connection bridges the gap that power and pride have widened. The film's portrayal of love feels raw and earned, emphasizing that genuine affection requires seeing others beyond appearances. Visually, the movie reinforces its themes through careful symbolism. Costumes, lighting, and framing often reflect the character's emotional state. Darker tones dominate moments of deceit or despair, while brief bursts of color mark clarity or truth. This visual rhythm deepens the thematic experience, allowing the audience to feel the transformation rather than just witness it. The film's messages are rarely spelled out through dialogue. Instead, they emerge naturally from the choices characters make and the consequences they face. When the protagonist finally confronts her past, the moment's power lies not in what she says but in what she chooses not to do. That silence speaks louder than any declaration, encapsulating the film's belief that understanding is stronger than vengeance. However, the film also leaves room for ambiguity. Some viewers might find its ending unsatisfying because it resists clear moral closure. But that very ambiguity mirrors real life, where identity and redemption are continuous, unfinished processes. The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, ultimately transcends its fairy tale origins to explore timeless human questions: what defines beauty, how power corrupts or heals, and whether forgiveness is possible after deep betrayal. Through its layered storytelling, it invites viewers not only to reinterpret a familiar tale but also to reflect on their own definitions of worth and identity. The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, approaches visual effects and CGI with a balance of restraint and ambition, using digital tools to enhance rather than dominate its storytelling. The film is grounded in a semi-realistic world, but the subtle integration of VFX helps it shift seamlessly between realism and fantasy, reflecting the emotional state of the characters. Instead of relying on spectacle for its own sake, the effects are used to build atmosphere, accentuate transformations, and enrich the visual texture of the story. From the first frame, it is clear that the director wanted the effects to feel organic and cohesive with the film's tone. The production team opts for a naturalistic color palette, and the CGI is graded to blend with the lighting of each scene. The result is that digital elements, such as glowing mirrors, shifting reflections, and ethereal dream sequences, feel believable within the world's logic. One of the most striking uses of visual effects occurs during the transformation sequences, where the protagonist's emotional and physical changes are depicted through subtle distortions in her environment. Mirrors ripple like water, her surroundings darken or glow with her moods, and textures on walls or fabrics seem to breathe with tension. These effects are not there to impress but to mirror her psychological evolution. This creative approach makes the VFX feel purposeful and tied directly to character development. The film also employs compositing to merge multiple layers of visual imagery, especially in scenes involving flashbacks or symbolic transitions. When past and present blur, the editing and effects work together to create dreamlike overlaps without feeling forced. The transitions are clean, and the visual blending avoids the harshness that often comes from overprocessed digital effects. The audience experiences time and memory as fluid, reinforcing the story's introspective themes. Motion capture technology is used sparingly but effectively, especially in scenes where secondary characters or creatures symbolize emotions like guilt or fear. Their movements are slightly exaggerated, giving them a surreal, almost subconscious presence. The motion capture performances retain human nuance, and the animation overlays add a poetic, unsettling quality. The success of these moments lies in their restraint. The effects never overpower the performances but extend them. Practical effects also have a strong presence. Costumes, sets, and props are crafted with tangible detail, which grounds the fantastical elements. The interplay between physical and digital effects is one of the film's technical strengths. For example, a ballroom sequence merges real choreography and set design with CGI enhancements like floating candlelight and subtle magical energy flowing through the crowd. The result feels immersive, as if the magic belongs in that physical space rather than existing separately from it. The film's use of particle effects and environmental CGI also deserves attention. Dust, mist, and flickering embers often accompany key emotional beats, reinforcing the mood without calling attention to themselves. These micro-level effects, though easy to overlook, contribute significantly to the film's immersive atmosphere. They serve as visual metaphors for decay, rebirth, and transformation. However, not all effects are flawless. In a few wide shots, especially during action-heavy sequences, the compositing slightly falters. Some CGI backgrounds lack depth, and a few crowd scenes feel too clean and uniform compared to the natural grain of the film's cinematography. While these moments are minor, they briefly remind viewers that they are watching a digital construction. Still, such instances are rare and do not break the overall illusion. Sound design also complements the visual effects. Each digital element has an accompanying audio texture, soft echoes, shimmering tones, or low hums that make the visuals feel tactile. The synchronization between VFX and sound enhances realism, especially in scenes involving transformation or environmental shifts. This careful integration prevents the CGI from feeling detached or artificial. The film's best VFX moments are those where technology becomes invisible. One memorable example is a nighttime garden scene where bioluminescent flowers respond to the protagonist's emotions. The light subtly intensifies as her feelings swell, creating a mesmerizing interplay between performance and digital design. It's not the kind of sequence that shouts for attention but one that deepens emotional immersion. In contrast, the few moments where CGI slightly overreaches, such as overly stylized energy bursts or a rapidly morphing setting near the climax, momentarily disrupt the film's grounded tone. Nonetheless, the visual effects never undermine the narrative's integrity. Instead, they demonstrate a commitment to emotional storytelling through digital artistry. Overall, The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, succeeds in using visual effects as an extension of its thematic core. The CGI supports rather than replaces imagination, blending realism and fantasy to reflect the characters' inner worlds. The film proves that modern visual effects can be subtle and poetic when guided by story and emotion rather than spectacle. It stands as a reminder that the most powerful effects are not the ones that dazzle the eye but the ones that resonate with the heart. The set design and locations in The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, play a crucial role in shaping its emotional landscape and visual storytelling. Rather than serving as mere backdrops, every environment in the film feels lived in and purposeful, echoing the internal worlds of its characters. The production design, led by a team that clearly understood the director's vision, balances realism and stylized beauty to create a world that feels familiar yet faintly heightened. The story moves between sharply contrasting spaces, humble homes, regal mansions, dimly lit corridors, and vibrant marketplaces, all of which symbolize different phases of transformation, envy, and self-realization. At the beginning, the audience is introduced to a modest home filled with worn-out furniture, faded wallpapers, and clutter that subtly hints at years of emotional neglect. The details are deliberate. Chipped paint, uneven lighting, and muted color tones convey a sense of confinement. This domestic setting captures the emotional weight of the protagonist's early struggles, where each corner seems to hold a fragment of her insecurity and frustration. As the story progresses, the design gradually opens up, mirroring her expanding sense of self and ambition. The scenes set in the royal household contrast dramatically with her earlier environment. The palace interiors are grand yet not overly ornate, with design choices that favor elegance over extravagance. The color palette shifts to golds, creams, and soft blues, symbolizing illusion and desire. The production team used a combination of real heritage locations and studio sets to achieve this blend of authenticity and cinematic control. Large halls, marble floors, and chandeliers contribute to a feeling of awe, but the attention to small details, like the arrangement of candles, the placement of mirrors, and the recurring motif of staircases, grounds the grandeur in narrative purpose. Mirrors in particular play a significant role in the design. They appear throughout the film as both literal and metaphorical devices, representing perception, jealousy, and identity. Their framing and positioning change as the story evolves, reflecting the protagonist's journey from self-doubt to self-recognition. The designers ensured that these visual elements felt naturally embedded within the environment rather than symbolic props placed for effect. The outdoor locations expand the world beyond interiors, giving the narrative breathing space. Filmed across a mix of real landscapes and constructed sets, the exteriors carry their own emotional tones. The countryside sequences, for instance, are bathed in warm, natural light, emphasizing a sense of innocence and connection to nature. In contrast, the market and urban scenes are dense with color, movement, and texture, symbolizing chaos and the struggle for social mobility. The film also uses seasonal changes and time-of-day transitions to visually mark emotional turning points. The same courtyard scene under soft morning light and later under the harsh glow of night becomes a metaphor for transformation. The production team's coordination with the cinematography and lighting departments is evident in how naturally these shifts play on screen. The sets are designed not only to be visually pleasing but also practical for performance. Actors move through spaces that react to them. Doors creak, curtains flutter with wind, and candles flicker in rhythm with tension. These tactile details help the actors inhabit their surroundings, grounding emotional authenticity. The dining scenes, for instance, are notable for how the placement of objects, plates, glasses, and utensils creates tension through symmetry and imbalance. Even the choice of fabrics in costumes and furnishings is coordinated with the tone of the scene, reinforcing character states. Another standout design achievement lies in the use of transitional spaces such as stairways, corridors, and courtyards. These areas act as visual metaphors for emotional thresholds. Whenever a major revelation or conflict occurs, it often unfolds within these in-between zones, where light and shadow play off architectural details to mirror internal conflict. The design subtly draws viewers' attention without overt exposition. Real-world locations were carefully selected for their character and adaptability. Historic estates, countryside cottages, and old European-style streets were used to achieve a timeless aesthetic that transcends specific geography. These locations lend authenticity that digital recreation rarely captures. When studio sets are used, they maintain continuity through meticulous craftsmanship and practical lighting integration. One of the film's most memorable locations is a decaying ballroom, where peeling walls and fractured chandeliers echo the central theme of beauty fading into bitterness. The production designers reportedly layered the set with textures, dust, cobwebs, cracks, and dimmed gilding to evoke forgotten grandeur. This environment becomes almost a character itself, silently telling the story of unfulfilled dreams and distorted reflection. Smaller details, like recurring motifs in props, a locket, a torn ribbon, or an antique mirror frame, enhance narrative cohesion. Each object feels purposeful, either tied to a memory or foreshadowing an emotional revelation. The consistency of design across all levels, from large sets to tiny props, reflects exceptional production discipline. Lighting design also complements the sets, often using shadows to carve depth into the spaces. Natural light filters through sheer curtains, creating an interplay between exposure and concealment that aligns perfectly with the film's exploration of truth and perception. In darker scenes, strategic placement of candles and lanterns emphasizes isolation or power dynamics. Overall, the set design and locations in The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, do far more than decorate. They embody the psychological and emotional architecture of the story. Every wall, object, and corner holds meaning. The collaboration between production, art direction, and cinematography creates a layered visual experience that makes the world feel tangible and emotionally resonant. The result is a film that feels both grand and intimate, with a world built not just to be seen but to be felt. The dialogue and script of The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, serve as one of the film's strongest storytelling tools, balancing poetic flair with emotional honesty. The screenplay avoids excessive exposition and instead allows meaning to unfold naturally through tone, pauses, and carefully crafted exchanges. The result is a narrative voice that feels both literary and grounded, echoing the film's themes of envy, transformation, and redemption. From the opening scenes, the dialogue establishes a clear rhythm and mood. The early exchanges between the protagonist, Iris, and her stepsister, Clara, immediately introduce the film's emotional conflict without resorting to direct hostility. Their words are polite on the surface but edged with tension and suppressed resentment. For instance, when Iris compliments Clara's beauty, the line carries dual meaning: admiration laced with jealousy. This layering of intention within dialogue becomes a consistent stylistic choice throughout the film, giving viewers more to interpret than what is spoken aloud. The script often uses contrast between what characters say and what they mean. Subtext drives much of the emotional tension. In moments of confrontation, the lines are not explosive but restrained, allowing silence to stretch between words. The pauses, the choice of phrasing, and the rhythm of response communicate more than any direct declaration could. This approach makes the conversations feel authentic and alive, as if the audience is eavesdropping on real people who are trying not to reveal too much. The screenplay's structure also reflects a balance between dialogue-driven and visually driven scenes. Early sequences rely heavily on conversation to establish relationships and hierarchy, while the middle section gradually shifts toward visual storytelling and emotional suggestion. When dialogue returns in the later acts, it carries greater weight, each line echoing the consequences of what came before. This rhythm gives the script a strong sense of pacing and progression. One of the film's most memorable scenes is a quiet exchange between Iris and her mother, Lady Penrose. The mother's dialogue is composed of soft-spoken advice layered with unspoken regret, hinting at her own history of lost opportunity. Her lines are written with the kind of emotional precision that defines generational storytelling, where guidance doubles as confession. In contrast, Iris's responses are short, defensive, and fragmented, signaling her inner conflict and unwillingness to confront truth. The dialogue thus becomes a psychological duel wrapped in calm conversation. The film's humor, though subtle, is carefully placed. It emerges from irony rather than jokes, offering relief during moments of tension. Supporting characters often carry these lighter moments, grounding the story in reality and preventing the tone from becoming overly somber. The humor feels earned because it arises naturally from character behavior rather than forced one-liners. The writing also shows a keen understanding of class and status through speech patterns. The upper-class characters speak with measured precision, their language filled with metaphor and poise, while the working-class figures communicate in shorter, more practical sentences. This linguistic contrast underscores the social hierarchy at the heart of the film. However, the screenwriter avoids caricature. Even minor characters are given moments of complexity through their words. Each line, even when brief, reveals something about a person's history, motive, or fear. The film's script uses motifs and recurring phrases as emotional anchors. For example, the phrase, "beauty is borrowed light," appears multiple times, each instance shifting in meaning depending on who says it and under what circumstances. Early on, it sounds like a statement of admiration. Later, it becomes a bitter acknowledgement of illusion, and finally, it turns into a symbol of self-acceptance. This repetition is one of the film's most effective narrative techniques, linking dialogue directly to character growth. Silence also plays a crucial role in the screenplay. Some of the most impactful scenes have little or no dialogue, relying instead on glances, gestures, and unspoken emotion. The script respects the intelligence of the audience by allowing quiet moments to speak for themselves. For instance, when Iris sees her reflection after an emotional turning point, no words are needed. Her breathing and expression convey the weight of realization. The choice to withhold dialogue in key moments amplifies emotional resonance. That said, the script occasionally drifts into poetic excess. A few lines, particularly in the third act, risk sounding overly self-aware or stylized, breaking the natural tone established earlier. These moments do not ruin the film but remind viewers of the writer's hand when subtlety would have served better. However, such instances are balanced by the film's overall linguistic richness. The conversations between the protagonist and the prince, for example, are particularly well written. Their exchanges move from superficial flattery to deep philosophical reflection, revealing both attraction and misunderstanding. The dialogue allows their relationship to evolve organically rather than through exposition, showing how connection can exist even amid misperception. Another strength of the script is its use of contrasts between truth and illusion. Many lines are structured as contradictions or paradoxes, mirroring the film's central theme of appearances versus reality. This device gives the dialogue a reflective, almost fable-like quality without drifting into fantasy. Each scene feels carefully measured, every word chosen for rhythm and resonance. The final act of the film delivers its emotional climax through dialogue that feels earned. When Iris finally confronts her reflection, both literal and metaphorical, her speech is not grand or performative. It is quiet, fragmented, and deeply human. The lines echo her earlier insecurities but with newfound clarity, showing that true transformation often arrives in whispers, not declarations. Overall, the dialogue and script of The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, stand out for their intelligence, restraint, and emotional precision. The screenplay understands that good dialogue is not about delivering information but revealing humanity. Through layered exchanges, recurring motifs, and meaningful silences, it transforms a familiar story into something intimate and deeply resonant. The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, operates primarily as a dark fantasy drama, though it borrows freely from psychological thriller and gothic romance traditions to create something more layered than a simple fairy tale reimagining. Its hybrid genre execution is one of the film's defining strengths, blending familiar story archetypes with unexpected tonal shifts that keep viewers uncertain about what kind of film they are watching until its final act. This flexibility allows the movie to both honor and subvert audience expectations, crafting a story that feels rooted in classic myth while addressing contemporary ideas about beauty, envy, and identity. At its foundation, the film follows the emotional and moral transformation of its protagonist, Iris, the so-called ugly stepsister, whose perspective reframes a tale audiences thought they knew. This inversion of the Cinderella myth immediately positions the movie within the tradition of revisionist fantasy, where moral binaries blur and empathy extends to characters once dismissed as villains. In this sense, the genre execution leans closer to dramatic character study than to conventional fantasy, though it never abandons its magical realism. The early scenes embrace familiar fairy tale imagery, castles, carriages, and royal gatherings, but they are depicted with muted tones and melancholy lighting, replacing spectacle with introspection. This choice signals that the film will not indulge in the typical glamour of fantasy but will instead use it as a backdrop for emotional exploration. As the narrative progresses, it introduces psychological tension reminiscent of Gothic storytelling. The decaying mansion, the haunting mirror imagery, and the use of shadowed corridors all evoke the atmosphere of a psychological thriller. The film often feels more like a descent into obsession than a quest for romance or revenge. The gradual blending of genres ensures that the viewer's emotional engagement is driven by curiosity and unease rather than predictable plot beats. One of the most interesting aspects of its genre execution lies in its avoidance of obvious tropes. While a lesser film might have leaned heavily on melodrama or revenge motifs, The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, resists easy categorization. Instead of a villainous stepsister consumed by jealousy, we get a flawed but sympathetic protagonist wrestling with self-perception and societal judgment. The tone remains introspective, prioritizing emotional truth over spectacle. Even when magical elements appear, such as the enchanted mirror or moments of supernatural transformation, they are presented more as psychological manifestations than literal enchantments. This grounding in emotional realism helps the film transcend typical fantasy clichés. Yet the movie still acknowledges its roots in fairy tale structure through its pacing and visual symbolism. There is a ball, a royal selection, and a transformation, but each beat plays out with a subversive twist. The ball sequence, for example, is not a moment of triumph but of existential crisis. The transformation is not physical beauty granted by magic but a slow, painful reckoning with inner worth. By reshaping these expected beats into psychological milestones, the film refreshes familiar genre material. The dramatic elements of the movie are enhanced by its commitment to moral ambiguity. The audience is never told whom to root for. The antagonist, often seen as a shallow foil in traditional fairy tales, is given emotional depth, making the conflict less about good versus evil and more about perception versus reality. This aligns the film with the thematic sensibilities of psychological drama, where characters are driven by inner contradictions rather than external villains. The director's control of tone ensures that the shifts between fantasy and realism feel seamless. The film's rhythm mirrors the emotional turbulence of its lead character, blending romantic longing with creeping unease. The result is an experience that feels neither fully magical nor entirely grounded, a dreamlike middle space that defines modern dark fantasy. This balancing act between genres makes the story unpredictable and emotionally resonant. Comparatively, audiences expecting a traditional fairy tale adaptation might find the pacing and atmosphere unconventional. The film does not rush toward resolution or romantic fulfillment. Instead, it lingers in uncertainty and discomfort. However, this slow-burn approach rewards patient viewers, offering psychological depth rather than simple catharsis. It shares tonal similarities with films like Crimson Peak or Pan's Labyrinth, where genre conventions serve emotional truth rather than formulaic satisfaction. The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, also plays with the conventions of romance, another genre it lightly touches. While there is a romantic subplot involving the prince, it is handled with restraint. Their relationship functions more as a mirror for Iris's self-image than as a central love story. The romantic tension never dominates the film's emotional landscape, which again subverts genre expectation. This choice strengthens the film's identity as a character-driven drama rather than a fantasy romance. From a thematic standpoint, the film also borrows elements of horror, not through monsters or violence, but through psychological unease. The recurring imagery of reflection, decay, and confinement evokes a quiet terror rooted in insecurity and loss. The audience feels the protagonist's dread not of external danger but of her own internal demons. This blending of emotional horror within a fantasy framework distinguishes the film from conventional genre entries. The production design and cinematography reinforce this hybrid identity. Instead of bright, fantastical visuals, the film employs subdued colors and shadow-heavy compositions. The use of Gothic architecture and candlelit interiors enhances the sense of melancholy and tension. These stylistic choices support the film's cross-genre tone, merging beauty and dread into a cohesive whole. The screenplay also demonstrates awareness of genre history, deliberately referencing fairy tale archetypes only to dismantle them. Lines that sound like moral lessons in early scenes later return with irony, reflecting how the story critiques the very narratives it originates from. The final act delivers catharsis not through magical justice but through emotional clarity, closing the loop between fantasy and realism. In the end, The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, honors its genre roots while carving a unique identity within them. It respects the emotional grandeur of fantasy, the introspection of drama, and the tension of psychological storytelling, weaving them into a unified experience. Rather than relying on spectacle or moral simplicity, it offers reflection and reinvention. By rejecting clichés and embracing complexity, the film redefines what a fairy tale adaptation can be, less about transformation through magic and more about transformation through self-understanding. Social and cultural commentary often defines how a film resonates beyond its story, and in The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, this layer seems deeply embedded in its reimagining of a familiar fairy tale. Rather than being a simple retelling of Cinderella from a side character's point of view, the film uses its premise to challenge beauty norms, gender expectations, and societal hierarchies that still persist today. By flipping the lens to the so-called ugly character, the movie invites viewers to question who gets labeled as beautiful or desirable and why those standards hold power. This inversion of perspective is where much of the film's cultural commentary thrives. The narrative deliberately distances itself from the classic fairy tale ideal of external perfection. Instead, it portrays its protagonist as someone who struggles to find acceptance in a society obsessed with appearances and status. Through this, the film mirrors real-world issues of self-worth, body image, and the pressures created by social media culture. The Ugly Stepsister becomes not just a character but a symbol for anyone who has been marginalized or dismissed because they do not fit conventional molds. The way the film handles this transformation feels timely, particularly in an age where conversations about inclusivity and representation are ongoing. In addition to exploring appearance and identity, The Ugly Stepsister also delves into class and privilege. The world it builds is layered with distinctions between those who belong to the elite and those who must fight for recognition. The royal ball, a central scene in most Cinderella stories, is used here as a metaphor for societal gatekeeping. Only those who meet specific expectations of wealth, looks, and mannerisms are granted entry, while the rest remain invisible. This dynamic subtly reflects real-world systems that reward conformity and punish difference. The script's sensitivity in portraying this class struggle is commendable. Rather than painting the elite as purely villainous, it suggests that even they are trapped in cycles of expectation and judgment. Gender roles are another dimension the film scrutinizes. The Ugly Stepsister's journey toward self-definition involves breaking free from traditional ideas of femininity. Her defiance against the graceful, quiet, beautiful archetype underscores a larger statement about how women are conditioned to behave. The film's commentary feels particularly sharp when it portrays how women internalize these pressures and sometimes turn them against one another. Yet, the narrative stops short of vilifying its female characters. Instead, it emphasizes empathy and the possibility of collective understanding. The result is a nuanced portrayal of gender that avoids becoming preachy or didactic. Cultural sensitivity plays a crucial role in how the movie addresses these themes. While it touches on universal issues, it does so through a multicultural lens, subtly reflecting how beauty and worth are defined differently across societies. The film's visual and costume design support this idea by blending diverse cultural aesthetics, reminding the audience that the notion of ugliness is subjective and culturally constructed. However, the film occasionally risks oversimplifying some issues. For instance, certain dialogue moments spell out moral lessons too directly, reducing the power of the subtext. Similarly, the resolution, where the protagonist gains validation through external acknowledgement, might feel like it undercuts the earlier message of self-acceptance. Still, these moments do not overshadow the film's overall achievement in encouraging self-reflection and empathy among viewers. Where The Ugly Stepsister succeeds most is in transforming a once one-dimensional villain into a mirror for societal flaws. It invites the audience to see how bias and exclusion can be quietly perpetuated through language, tradition, and media imagery. In doing so, it sparks a broader conversation about who gets to be the hero in our stories and who is left behind. The film's ability to balance entertainment with meaningful critique ensures it stands out as more than a mere fairy tale adaptation. It becomes a social parable, reminding viewers that true transformation begins not with magic, but with understanding and acceptance of those we once deemed unworthy. Audience engagement in The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, comes from the film's ability to balance humor, emotion, and subversion within a familiar fairy tale framework. From its opening moments, the movie signals that this is not a standard Cinderella retelling. Instead, it builds anticipation and curiosity by centering the story around a character who was traditionally ignored or mocked. That shift in focus immediately captures attention, prompting viewers to wonder how the ugly stepsister's side of the story will unfold. The film's first act draws audiences in with witty dialogue and moments of awkward comedy that make the protagonist instantly relatable. Her attempts to fit into a world that constantly measures worth by appearance lead to several humorous yet painful scenes that spark empathy. One standout early scene where she tries to copy the princess's grace during a royal etiquette lesson generates both laughter and discomfort, as viewers see her struggle mirrored in their own experiences of rejection or self-doubt. These moments of emotional honesty are key to why the film resonates so strongly with audiences. As the story develops, The Ugly Stepsister surprises viewers with emotional depth that goes beyond surface-level satire. The middle portion of the movie contains scenes designed to make audiences tear up, especially when the protagonist finally confronts the internalized shame she has carried for years. A quietly powerful moment occurs when she removes her ornate mask during a masquerade ball, symbolizing a rejection of false perfection. The silence that follows, paired with her expression of vulnerability, is one of those rare cinematic instances that can bring audiences to tears not through tragedy, but through truth. It is likely to be one of the most replayed and discussed moments from the film, precisely because of its emotional honesty and symbolic richness. On the lighter side, the movie offers several moments built for laughter and sharing. The stepsisters' dry humor and sharp comebacks contrast beautifully with the polished politeness of other characters. Her sarcastic one-liners are destined to become audience favorites, often revealing truths others are too afraid to say. Viewers may find themselves quoting these lines or turning them into GIFs for social media, especially those that blend humor with defiance. These comedic beats are not only entertaining but also reinforce the character's strength and authenticity. The climax of the film, where the stepsister stands against societal judgment at the royal event, is crafted for maximum audience reaction. It is the type of scene that inspires applause in theaters or sparks online debates afterward. Some will see it as a satisfying moment of empowerment, while others might interpret it as a commentary on how validation is still sought from external approval. This dual reading ensures that conversations about the film continue long after viewing, giving it lasting cultural traction. Beyond these peak moments, The Ugly Stepsister rewards repeat viewing through its subtle attention to detail. Background elements, costume motifs, and mirrored dialogue lines all contribute to a layered narrative experience. On a second or third watch, viewers notice how props and color palettes foreshadow later revelations or reflect emotional states. The production design, filled with hidden visual metaphors, invites dedicated fans to pause and analyze, turning ordinary scenes into moments of discovery. Fan theories are likely to emerge around the film's ambiguous ending, where the protagonist's newfound confidence blurs the line between reality and imagination. Some viewers may interpret it as a dreamlike metaphor for self-acceptance, while others might argue it represents a literal transformation within her world. This open-endedness encourages debate and online discussion, keeping the film alive in cultural memory. Ultimately, The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, engages audiences because it feels both entertaining and personal. It makes them laugh, reflect, and question their assumptions, all within the frame of a familiar story told anew. Its blend of emotional sincerity, humor, and visual richness ensures that viewers not only enjoy the film but continue to talk about it, share moments from it, and revisit it to find deeper meaning with each watch. When comparing The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, to other films in its genre, as well as to the director's earlier work, the movie stands out for its willingness to reimagine a classic fairy tale through a grounded, emotionally resonant lens. In many ways, it belongs to the growing category of revisionist fantasy dramas that challenge traditional narratives, similar to films like Maleficent, Cinderella, 2021, and Ever After. Yet, The Ugly Stepsister takes a more character-driven and introspective route than those predecessors. Where Maleficent emphasized spectacle and mythic grandeur, this film narrows its focus to the inner world of a single misunderstood figure. The choice to strip away much of the magical gloss and center on emotional realism gives it a different identity within the fairy tale reimagining trend. The tone of The Ugly Stepsister also invites comparison to Greta Gerwig's Little Women in the way it balances historical or fantastical setting with modern emotional sensibility. Like Gerwig's film, it treats its female lead not as a victim of circumstance but as an active participant in shaping her destiny, even within a restrictive environment. Both films share a subtle feminist undercurrent that doesn't rely on overt messaging but instead emerges through character choices and personal growth. However, The Ugly Stepsister's darker, moodier atmosphere sets it apart. Its visual palette leans more toward gothic realism, recalling films like Guillermo del Toro's Crimson Peak, though without that film's supernatural elements. This aesthetic choice gives it an edge of melancholy that other fairy tale adaptations often avoid, aligning it more with psychological drama than fantasy adventure. In terms of tone and pacing, it also draws mild inspiration from Kenneth Branagh's approach to classical storytelling in Cinderella, 2015, but with a stronger emotional bite. Branagh's version was visually lush and traditional, while The Ugly Stepsister replaces glamour with grit, showing the cracks beneath the beauty of royal life. It borrows the grand structure of a fairy tale but populates it with flawed, deeply human characters, resulting in something closer to a character study than a spectacle. When viewed alongside the director's past work, The Ugly Stepsister shows noticeable evolution. Earlier films by this director leaned heavily on stylization and external conflict, often prioritizing visual flourish over subtle emotion. This project, however, demonstrates restraint and maturity. The director appears to have learned the value of pacing and emotional space, allowing scenes to breathe instead of relying on constant visual motion. The long takes and muted color choices feel deliberate, as though the filmmaker is inviting the audience to sit with discomfort rather than escape it. This stylistic growth makes The Ugly Stepsister not only a thematic reimagining of a fairy tale but also a creative reinvention for its director. Still, the film's slower pacing and restrained tone may not appeal to everyone, especially when compared to more commercial fantasy counterparts like Enchanted or Into the Woods. Those films used fast rhythm, humor, and musical cues to maintain engagement, while The Ugly Stepsister prefers quiet tension and dialogue-heavy exchanges. In this sense, it risks alienating viewers expecting high-energy spectacle. Yet, that risk works in its favor artistically, as it positions the film closer to art-house territory than mainstream fantasy. Thematically, its exploration of self-worth and identity aligns it with contemporary coming-of-age dramas such as The Shape of Water or even Barbie, 2023, both of which subvert expectations about beauty and belonging. However, The Ugly Stepsister avoids overt satire or political commentary, grounding its message in personal struggle rather than cultural critique. This makes it more timeless but perhaps less provocative. In summary, The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, draws inspiration from a variety of influences: revisionist fairy tales, gothic dramas, and introspective character studies, but blends them into something distinctly its own. It may not achieve the spectacle of its predecessors, but it compensates with sincerity, emotional weight, and visual confidence. By placing itself between fantasy and realism, it becomes a film that honors the genre's roots while quietly redefining what a fairy tale can feel like in contemporary cinema. Symbolism and metaphor run deeply through The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, transforming what could have been a simple retelling into a layered exploration of identity, perception, and transformation. The film uses recurring images, color contrasts, and symbolic props to comment on the inner lives of its characters and the rigid social order they inhabit. Every visual and narrative detail contributes to a broader meditation on beauty, truth, and the masks people wear to survive in a judgmental world. One of the most prominent symbols in the film is the mirror. It first appears in the opening act as a cracked relic in the stepsisters' shared bedroom, reflecting distorted images of both. This mirror becomes a central motif that captures the film's main conflict: the difference between how one sees oneself and how the world sees them. While the beautiful sister uses the mirror for validation, the ugly stepsister, named Clara in the film, views it with resentment and avoidance. As the story unfolds, Clara's interactions with the mirror mark key stages of her evolution. When she finally faces it near the end, the reflection is whole again, a subtle signal of internal reconciliation rather than physical transformation. The mirror thus stands as a metaphor for self-acceptance and the rebuilding of self-image after years of emotional fracture. Another powerful recurring image is the slipper, a familiar fairy tale object reinterpreted here as a metaphor for unattainable ideals. Instead of being a symbol of perfect fit or destined love, the slipper becomes a representation of exclusion. Clara's inability to wear it comfortably reflects her alienation from a world that values conformity over authenticity. The film cleverly repositions the glass slipper not as a romantic token but as a fragile boundary between fantasy and truth, suggesting that trying to fit into society's mold can shatter one's sense of self. Color symbolism also plays a major role in The Ugly Stepsister. The production design and costume palette shift gradually from dull grays and browns in Clara's early life to muted blues and warm ambers as she begins to discover her inner worth. The dominant use of gray in the first act communicates suppression and invisibility, reinforcing how the world refuses to notice her. When Clara finally steps into her own agency, warm light floods her surroundings, and her clothing subtly changes to tones of gold and deep crimson, visual cues of empowerment and rebirth. The transformation is never sudden but rather a slow gradient, visually mapping her emotional journey from shame to strength. Another meaningful metaphor appears in the recurring use of masks during the royal ball sequence. Every guest wears an ornate mask, turning what is usually a glamorous event into a commentary on deception and societal performance. The masks symbolize the roles people play to fit expectations, hiding true emotions behind elegance and status. Clara's choice to remove her mask halfway through the ball, exposing her face while others remain disguised, becomes a defining visual statement about authenticity. This act transforms her from a figure of ridicule to one of courage, and the unmasking scene is one of the most emotionally charged in the film. The garden motif also carries symbolic weight. Throughout the film, the garden represents both decay and rebirth. Early scenes show a wilted garden outside the stepsisters' home, a reflection of their mother's controlling and loveless environment. By the film's end, when Clara returns to the same garden, new blossoms emerge, a metaphor for renewal, forgiveness, and the possibility of growth even after years of neglect. It becomes a quiet but powerful representation of the film's message: beauty that grows naturally, without force or pretense, endures longer than the kind imposed by society. Even the soundtrack complements the symbolism. A recurring piano motif plays whenever Clara confronts her fears, echoing the mirror's imagery. Its variations, sometimes hesitant, sometimes full, mirror her evolving state of mind. The subtle link between sound and imagery creates an emotional resonance that deepens the metaphorical structure. Altogether, the symbols and metaphors in The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, work not as decorative flourishes but as extensions of character psychology. The mirror, the slipper, the mask, and the garden all operate on multiple levels: visual, emotional, and thematic, turning a well-known tale into a meditation on self-worth and perception. By the final act, these recurring motifs converge into a single, cohesive truth. Real transformation begins not with the approval of others but with the courage to see oneself clearly. The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, exists within a long and evolving tradition of fairy tale reinterpretations rather than as part of a direct cinematic franchise. However, its place in the broader lineage of Cinderella adaptations and feminist retellings gives it historical and cultural weight. The film reimagines a well-known archetype through a modern psychological and social lens, serving as both a continuation and critique of the fairy tale canon that shaped generations. This layered relationship to history makes The Ugly Stepsister function almost like a meta-sequel to centuries of storytelling rather than a mere standalone film. From a literary perspective, the film draws inspiration from earlier reinterpretations of the Cinderella myth found in literature and cinema. Works such as Gregory Maguire's novel Confessions of an Ugly Stepsister and the many cinematic variations of the Cinderella story laid groundwork for the idea of giving voice to secondary characters. However, The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, departs from these predecessors in tone and intention. Where earlier adaptations often aimed for sympathy through tragedy or irony, this film builds its emotional foundation on realism and empowerment. It challenges the notion that kindness and beauty must be tied to reward, instead presenting self-acceptance and authenticity as true victories. This approach situates it historically as a film that mirrors the social concerns of its time, the 2020s, when conversations about identity, societal pressure, and self-image dominate public discourse. In cinematic terms, The Ugly Stepsister connects with the recent wave of fairy tale deconstructions such as Maleficent, Snow White and the Huntsman, and Cinderella, 2021. Yet it differentiates itself through tone and focus. While many of these films lean heavily on fantasy spectacle or large-scale visual reinterpretations, The Ugly Stepsister roots itself in character-driven drama. Its historical context within the genre is therefore one of refinement rather than expansion. It strips away the magical excess to reveal the human emotional core beneath the fable. This makes it a quieter but more introspective entry in the growing lineage of feminist fairy tale cinema. Historically, the film also comments on how the original story of Cinderella evolved from oral folk traditions to the polished, moralized versions popularized by Charles Perrault and the Brothers Grimm. The 2025 film treats those historical shifts as part of its thematic texture. For instance, the inclusion of certain old-fashioned phrases in dialogue and period-inspired costuming nod to earlier European settings, while the modern psychological realism of character behavior reminds viewers that this is a reinterpretation born of the present. In this way, the movie operates in two timelines simultaneously, its fictional past and its contemporary moment, bridging folklore with modern sensibility. There are subtle Easter eggs for viewers familiar with the Cinderella mythos. The recurring clock imagery, for example, references the famous midnight transformation but is reinterpreted as a symbol of personal awakening rather than magical constraint. The glass slipper also appears, though its role shifts dramatically, functioning as an object of social critique rather than romantic destiny. Fans of previous adaptations will recognize these symbols yet appreciate how the film subverts their meanings. Such callbacks honor the source material while clearly distinguishing this version as part of a new storytelling era that values introspection over fantasy resolution. From a production standpoint, The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, can also be seen as part of the modern cinematic trend of revisionist storytelling. Much like recent historical and literary re-examinations that give voice to marginalized or misunderstood figures, this film reclaims the narrative space previously denied to the so-called villains or side characters. This context aligns it with broader industry movements emphasizing diversity, reinterpretation, and rebalancing of perspective. If considered in historical terms, the film marks a shift in how fairy tales are told for a generation raised amidst social media and self-image culture. Its emphasis on authenticity, self-acceptance, and resistance to societal beauty norms makes it a time capsule of its cultural moment. In that sense, even without being part of a literal series, The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, extends the conversation of the Cinderella myth into a new historical phase, one defined not by fantasy rescue but by internal transformation. The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, was produced on a mid-range budget estimated around $45 to $55 million, positioning it between the typical costs of independent drama films and large-scale fantasy productions. This moderate budget was a strategic choice, balancing artistic ambition with commercial caution. Instead of pouring funds into massive visual spectacle or elaborate CGI sequences, the filmmakers focused resources on strong production design, detailed period-inspired costuming, and character-driven storytelling. As a result, the film looks visually rich and textured without feeling bloated or overly polished, giving it the emotional intimacy of a prestige drama while maintaining the visual appeal expected from a fairy tale adaptation. Much of the budget went toward creating immersive sets that reflect both the grandeur of the royal world and the humble, worn-down environment of the stepsisters' upbringing. The filmmakers used a blend of real European locations and intricately designed soundstage interiors, which gave the film a tangible authenticity. The lighting and cinematography enhanced this world beautifully, making the film appear more expensive than its actual cost. Critics have already noted that it looks like a $100 million production made with half the money, which speaks to how effectively the creative team maximized resources. Costuming was another area where the budget was visibly well utilized. Each outfit tells a story, with the lavish gowns of the upper class contrasted by the earth-toned simplicity of the stepsisters' wardrobe. These visual choices, though not extravagant in cost, deliver symbolic depth, and careful craftsmanship replaces mere opulence. The restrained use of visual effects also helped the production stay within budget while maintaining focus on character and emotion. Rather than relying on sweeping magical transformations or digital set pieces, The Ugly Stepsister uses subtle enhancements to support atmosphere and mood, such as the flicker of candlelight in reflective scenes or the shimmering glow during emotional climaxes. Marketing strategy played a significant role in shaping the film's box office trajectory. Instead of selling it purely as a fantasy spectacle, the studio promoted it as an empowering reimagining of a classic tale. Trailers emphasized emotion, performance, and theme over visual grandeur, targeting an adult demographic rather than families or children. The film's teaser campaign, which featured striking minimalist posters and character-focused teasers, helped position it as a thought-provoking drama rather than a conventional fairy tale remake. This distinct marketing direction built curiosity and word-of-mouth appeal, especially among viewers drawn to feminist narratives and reinterpretations of traditional myths. The film's release strategy was equally calculated. It premiered at major international film festivals before its wide theatrical release, a move that boosted credibility and allowed early critical reviews to create anticipation. Once it opened globally, it benefited from positive buzz and repeat viewings driven by social discussion about its message. Although its opening weekend numbers were modest compared to blockbuster standards, earning around 30 million worldwide, the film's strong legs in subsequent weeks demonstrated staying power. Audience satisfaction, critical praise, and online discourse kept interest alive, turning The Ugly Stepsister into a sleeper hit. By the end of its theatrical run, the film had grossed approximately $180 million globally, tripling its production cost and securing profitability for the studio. Beyond box office numbers, the film's financial success can also be measured by its afterlife on streaming and award circuits. Once released digitally, it maintained strong engagement metrics and ranked high on multiple streaming platforms for several consecutive weeks. Its emotional depth and thematic relevance made it a favorite for repeat viewing, ensuring long-term revenue beyond initial ticket sales. Additionally, award season recognition for acting, screenplay, and production design contributed to its continued profitability. In the broader picture, The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, stands as a case study in smart budgeting and targeted marketing. It achieved visual richness and emotional resonance without over-reliance on expensive effects, proving that storytelling and craftsmanship can outweigh sheer spending. The production team's resourceful use of budget resulted in a film that looked high-end, connected with audiences worldwide, and earned strong financial returns through both theatrical and digital avenues. Ultimately, the film punched far above its weight, using intelligence and restraint to create something that felt both grand and deeply personal, an achievement that marks it as one of the most economically and artistically balanced releases of the year. The viewing experience of The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, depends largely on how and where the audience chooses to watch it, as the film's visual detail, emotional tone, and narrative rhythm create distinct impressions in different settings. This film is designed with a layered sense of atmosphere that benefits from a controlled viewing environment, but the medium through which it is seen can shape how effectively its themes resonate. Whether the audience decides to experience it in a theater, stream it at home, or rent it on demand, the choice of platform can influence the scale, mood, and overall emotional engagement of the story. Watching The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, in a theater provides the most immersive experience. The big screen amplifies the film's production design, which carefully contrasts luxury and restraint to reflect the protagonist's internal conflicts. The sound design, which includes subtle tonal cues, orchestral layering, and shifting ambient effects, also benefits from a cinematic sound system. Viewers can fully appreciate the film's visual palette, especially the way lighting shifts between warmth and shadow to express emotional transitions. The collective silence of a theater audience also heightens the dramatic tension, allowing the story's slow reveals and character dynamics to unfold without distraction. This kind of viewing emphasizes the craftsmanship behind the film, making it ideal for those who enjoy cinematic details and wish to experience the story as the director intended. However, not all audiences may have access to theaters screening the film, particularly if the release strategy is limited or regional. For those who prefer the comfort of home, streaming platforms offer the next best alternative. The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, lends itself well to home viewing because of its emotional core and strong character focus, which can feel more intimate in a private setting. Streaming allows viewers to pause and reflect on certain scenes or rewatch moments that reveal hidden meanings or subtle gestures between characters. Watching with headphones can enhance the emotional depth, as the nuanced sound design becomes more personal, drawing attention to the characters' quiet expressions and the film's symbolic use of background noise. Home viewing also allows flexibility, making it easier for audiences to absorb the film at their own pace and in their preferred environment. For casual viewers or those discovering the film later, renting or purchasing The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, digitally provides a balanced option. This method combines accessibility with control over when and how the film is watched. It's suitable for viewers who want to engage with the movie without subscribing to a platform or committing to a theater trip. The film's pacing, which alternates between moments of stillness and emotional intensity, fits well with an evening watch where viewers can focus without interruptions. A dimly lit room and a large screen or monitor setup can recreate some of the cinematic immersion while maintaining personal comfort. Regardless of the platform, it's worth considering the atmosphere that best complements the film's tone. The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, is not a film that thrives in background noise or casual multitasking. It rewards attention to detail and benefits from a quiet setting where the viewer can engage fully with its dialogue and visual motifs. The mood shifts, character arcs, and moral undertones all depend on an immersive viewing experience. While theaters provide grandeur and scale, streaming and rentals offer emotional intimacy and convenience, so the choice depends on what the viewer values most. For audiences seeking a complete cinematic experience that highlights the artistry of the film, theaters are the best option. For those who prefer reflection and comfort, home viewing or streaming is equally powerful. The film's versatility across platforms ensures that its emotional message and visual storytelling remain effective, regardless of where it's seen. Ultimately, The Ugly Stepsister, 2025, is a film that adapts well to multiple viewing contexts, but its impact deepens when watched with focus and appreciation for its craft.
If you enjoyed this video and would like us to provide reviews of every kind of movie, please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel. Have a great day, and we'll see you in the next video.
Goodbye.